as I always challenge you to do and encourage you to do, make sure you chime in on the chat. Make sure if you have any questions, if you have any comments, chime in on the chat. We'll make sure we acknowledge you. We appreciate all the RTJs for tuning in every single week. As always, this is brought to you and powered by Black and Forward. We want to encourage you to go visit forwardtimes.com to check out the latest news, as well as jeffreylboney.com to engage with me, as well as to buy my new book called Don't Argue With Me, a no-nonsense approach to the issues in the Black community. We're going to get right into it. You know, many of us have probably endured a traumatic experience in their life, something that was painful, and it could have been big or small, but it was something that left a scar on you, something that you had a challenge trying to move past and to forget. In some instances, it's very, very difficult to do, if at all. On last week, you know, we had a guest that talked about the trauma in their life and how it was very difficult for them to move forward, even to this day, past 50 years of age. And so, you know, when you think about the issue of slavery, you often hear people talking about just get past it, move on. That happened way back years and years and years ago. But when you think about America's original sin, slavery, and how from the inception of this country until present, that stain, that scar, that horrific and barbaric institution that, you know, impacted many of our foreparents, you know, is something that continues to linger, not only in the hearts and minds of many of the descendants of those formerly enslaved people of African descent, but also in the institutions that we are subjected to here in this country. In 1619, August the 20th, as a matter of fact, that is the first known, I guess, situation where we're able to identify that a slave ship landed on America's shores. August the 20th, 1619, the ship, the White Lion, at Point Comfort, which is near Norfolk, Virginia. You know, we talk about 1619, and you talk about the horrific and barbaric institution of slavery lasting up until the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln. And then even past that, you know, 2 years or so later, where many people in the South, including right here in Texas, on the Galveston shores, found out through Gordon Granger that we were no longer enslaved as a people. And so you think about how important it is for this country to highlight many of the atrocities, the tragedies that have occurred, not only here in this country, but across the world. Here in the United States, we remember things like the Holocaust, we remember Pearl Harbor, we remember 9/11, and many other things. But never have we really focused on remembering those that suffered, those voiceless individuals in many cases that suffered from the horrific and barbaric institution of slavery. Well, there's an individual that's currently serving in the United States Congress who represents the 9th District here in Texas, Congressman Al Green, who has introduced legislation for Original Slavery Remembrance Day, so that we'll never forget what happened to those that were formerly enslaved and that suffered that barbaric institution. Here joining me today to talk about his legislation and a recent breakfast that he held to commemorate the lives of those that were part of that institution is none other than Congressman Al Green. Let's give it up, y'all. Congressman Green. All right.
Thank you for the very warm, kind, and quite frankly, stimulating introduction.
Well, you heard some of what I talked about, and of course, you're very well versed in this situation. And first of all, I thank you for being such a staunch proponent of ensuring that we remember this barbaric institution. When you think about what many state legislatures are pushing through this critical race theory narrative, is what I call it, and at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level, you know, people are trying to whitewash history. They're trying to make us forget what actually happened. And again, what I talked about being America's original sin. So what was the genesis of why you felt this was important?
Well, thank you for the question. And if I may, let me just further introduce myself, because I think it's important and it's relative to what we're discussing. Mm-hmm. I'm the descendant of the people who built roads and bridges in this country, the descendant of the people who built the capital, the nation's capital, They picked the cotton and planted the crops. I am a proud descendant of enslaved people.
Mm,
And I think it's important for us to, at the genesis of these conversations, to note who we are. Because for too long, we have been taught to believe that somehow we should be ashamed of our history.
mm,
We have a proud history. This country needs to celebrate and commemorate those who suffered so that America could succeed.
mhm,
And they were the enslaved people.
mhm,
Hundreds of years without a payday.
mhm.
America didn't get where she is because they paid those enslaved people. She got where she is because they had free labor.
Mhm.
So I'm the proud descendant of those persons. Now, why would I bring this to our attention? Well, initially, the thought is to make sure that we don't forget. It's important for us to remember what happened, but it's also important for us to set the record straight. There are people who would have us believe that slavery was involuntary relocation.
Mhm,
That's what happens when a tornado hits your home and you're forced to leave.
mhm.
You involuntarily relocate. Slavery was kidnapping, it was murder, it was separating families at the auction block, it was a destructive system that wouldn't allow people to enjoy their language,
It was rape.
their culture. Yes. So it was a horrific institution. And we have to tell the truth about it so that we can get on with it as people want to
Mhm,
have us do. We can get on with it after we get on with what really happened.
mhm,
So we have to do this. And a resolution in Congress passed, HRS 517, with 218 people voting for it, 207 people voted against it,
mhm.
but it passed. And upon the passage of that resolution, that opened the doors for us to do other things. But to be very succinct, I concluded that this is something that should be done because we have to appreciate our history and not be ashamed of it to the extent that we allow those who would enslave us to
Mm,
become idolized
mm,
to the detriment of those who were victimized.
mm. Yeah, I
We-
want to
we
talk
have to-
about that. I want to, man, that was a great point you just made. But let's go back to the vote count 218, 207, you say?
Yes.
Of course, there was probably debate on the floor about this, right? Or
Well,
did they talk about?
the debate was minimal.
Okay,
It was a part of some other legislation,
okay.
as is the case with a good deal of the legislation
Mhm.
that passes. It was minimal, but I never expected everybody to support slavery remembrance because if it were supported unanimously, it would have been done a long time ago.
Right, right,
I mean, the opportunity has existed for 400 plus years
right.
to do this, and it wasn't done. So I expect opposition. Then there's going to be a lot more opposition as we proceed with this and we succeed with it.
Mhm.
There'll be more opposition, but it's a necessary thing for us to do. And the great things that are done in spite of
Yes,
the opposition.
yes. Let me ask you this from a procedural standpoint, because you're in the House and a member of Congress. What is the next steps? I mean, it passed the House. So usually it would go to the Senate and then to the president's desk. Is that the process with a resolution?
Good you asked. Great question. Probably the best question that you're going to ask me because it gives me an opportunity to explain the ultimate goal. When Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he did not have the approval of the Senate, nor did he have the approval of the House.
Mm,
For presidents to sign these declarations, these proclamations, they don't have to have approval from anybody other than the person who has the pen, and that's the president.
mm,
So my goal ultimately is to get the president to do something. It was to get the Senate and the House only because that way you can force something on the president. But if the president will do something on his own motion voluntarily, then you don't need the House and you don't need the Senate.
gotcha.
So the truth is we have a victory. The president has already acknowledged it in a statement that he issued the day we had that breakfast.
Mhm.
After the breakfast on August the 20th, he acknowledged that slavery remembrance was important. I have his statement here, but he acknowledged it. So in a sense, we have a victory, but that's not exactly what the goal was. We have this victory. The goal is to have it pervasive. Everybody in the country needs to know about it. And the best way to do that would be to get the president, if he would, to have a slavery remembrance day breakfast and invite people from all over the country, but call this one a slavery remembrance prayer breakfast.
Mhm.
and then bring in the clergy. Just as we had over 1,000 people to come out to our breakfast, we'll get tens of thousands who will want to be a party to this. It would be the first of its kind, and that in of itself is a selling point. So we want to get these persons to come, and then we can then institutionalize it such that when they go back to the various communities, on every August 20th, we'll have some sort of slavery remembrance event taking place. That's ultimately the goal, to have it traverse the country and pervasive within the country.
So what do you say to those individuals who would look at this and be like, it's such a dark part of our history, it's such a negative thing that happened to us as a people. Why would we want to celebrate this? Why would we want to commemorate this as an African American?
For the same reason we memorialize a day called Memorial Day. We make sure that those who suffered and gave their lives for this country, that we don't forget them.
Yes.
In fact, we have Memorial Day.
Yes.
For all of those soldiers, those military people who died. Well, the slaves died for this country too.
Yes.
And their day ought to be on the same level, not the same, similar dates, but not the same as Memorial Day.
Yes.
And we ought to, we don't denigrate the persons who died in Korea. We don't denigrate the persons who died in Afghanistan. We don't denigrate the persons who died in World War I, World War II, those who were the chosen frozen. We don't denigrate any of these people. We commemorate their lives. We have to decide that that's dark for the people who tried to enslave them, but we are proud that they were able to succeed to the extent that they did because we're on their shoulders.
Yes.
We are the prodigies of those persons who suffered the indignation and humiliation and the sacrifice of life so that we could have this life and this opportunity. I contend that every Black person alive ought to receive an award just for being alive, given all that we've been through, given from whence we've come. This has not been an easy journey for us, and it's not easy now. I mean, the journey involved after the Emancipation Proclamation, and then the 13th Amendment really freed the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation would have freed the slaves in the southern states, but then General Granger came in, as you indicated. But then after the 13th Amendment, this country didn't give in and say, okay, you're right. We had convict leasing. You know about the Sugar Land 95.
Absolutely.
95 people buried in a common grave, simply because they were Black. And they were able to put them in that grave because they had something called Black codes. You violate some minor offense.
Jaywalking.
And it's some offense. Then they take you, put you in jail, and then lease you out to a plantation owner. That's what happened to those folks. So after you got the Black codes and the people being put into these places called convict leasing programs, then you get to something called lawful segregation. It was against the law for me to go in the front door at one time. Against the law for me to go into a certain restroom, drink from a certain water fountain, sit in a certain place in the movie, a certain place on the bus. Had to sit in the back of the bus, the balcony of the movie, and locked up in the bottom of the jail. We have not had an easy journey, and we have to tell that story. But our survival is a success story. Our survival is not a dark part of our history. The mere fact that we made it means that this country, to a certain extent, was flexible enough so that we could make it. But it doesn't mean that we are going to say that those persons who tried to keep us enslaved, or those persons who perpetuated invidious discrimination by the way of segregation, that we celebrate them. No, we celebrate those who suffered through it, and we should. And now we still have invidious discrimination. If you've ever bought a car, you're likely to have been discriminated against. If you got a loan, if you paid cash, you may have paid too much. But if you ever bought a house and you got a mortgage, you're likely to have been discriminated against. I sit on the Financial Services Committee. I am the chairperson of Oversight and Investigation, a subcommittee. In that subcommittee, I have with intentionality investigated these things. And we have empirical evidence to show that Black people who go to the bank, apply for a loan, who have better credentials than an Anglo person, we call them white people in this country, not to be offensive to anybody, but better than a white person, better credibility in terms of credit, will pay more for points for the loan, or will pay more in interest rate for the loan, or will get less money.
Mm.
That happens in this country on a daily basis as I'm speaking to you currently.
Mm.
The empirical evidence supports it. If you decide that you want to buy a house, there are certain neighborhoods where you'll be steered away from. There's this steering to direct you to another neighborhood simply because of who you may be, your color, your skin complexion. And when you decide that you are going to buy that house in that neighborhood and you look for that mortgage in 2008 when we had the downturn in the economy, there were persons who were paying, who were of African ancestry, who were paying something called a yield spread premium. The yield spread premium allowed the person who was your loan originator to say to you when you applied for your loan, good news, we got you a loan for 12%. The loan was for 8%.
Mm.
You were told 12%. The originator and the lender would split that spread.
4%.
They split that. That's called a yield spread premium.
Yeah.
We outlawed that in Dodd-Frank to the extent that we could. But the point is, Black people suffered more as victims of the yield spread premium than anybody else. So we have still a way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we don't commemorate, and to a certain extent, as we do in our church upon the transition of a person, and celebrate the life. We commemorate them for the tragedy associated with their death, but the life we celebrate.
So you're saying that you're not celebrating, or this is not to celebrate slavery or commemorate slavery, but those who were enslaved.
Yes.
And you believe, and I thank you for laying it out, because, you know, as you talked about Memorial Day as a comparison, you know, those individuals suffered, bled, died, voluntarily giving of themselves to serve this country and to go fight on foreign land in most cases. These individuals involuntarily were forced into this work, this life, and died, as many of them died as a result. Some of them didn't even make it to the shores. And so I think it's important, man. We tend to, as a people, for whatever reason, and I don't know, Congressman Green, how far you want to go with this, but I just feel like collectively, as a people, it seems as if we're just adopted everybody else's culture but our own, and forget everybody else's history, original history, than our own. Thoughts?
Well, we have been inculcated into a society that sometimes is antithetical to our best interests. And we, unfortunately, if you're in a situation long enough.
Hold that thought for a second. RTJs, I want y'all to take this moment to go get your thesauruses out, because he's going to be using some SAT words that you probably never heard before.
We got them, Jeff. We got some.
You got some? Okay, all right. Go ahead, Congressman. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure that they were prepared for you.
Well, you're kind. You're kind. And I greatly appreciate you've just been wonderful with this interview. I hope that somebody's recording it, because I'd like to have a copy to.
Oh yeah, it's definitely, it's live and it's being recorded.
Okay, well, good. Live and in living color.
Yes, indeed.
All right. But we have to understand that as we are in the belly of a beast, you can get comfortable there, and it becomes normalized. It just becomes something that you expect. You don't question it after a while. Invidious discrimination by way of segregation was normalized to the extent that if Anglos had decided that we were going to the back door, I went to back doors, and if they didn't have a back door, we would march and protest and say, "Where's our back door?"
Oh wow!
What's wrong with you?
Yes.
You know, we deserve a back door.
Wow.
So that it's normalized.
Wow.
It gets normalized, and once it gets normalized, once it gets normalized, you feel very comfortable, and then if they change it in any way, then you get upset.
Yeah.
You remember Malcolm talked about how when the slaves were finally freed, there would be a brother who come and say, "Man, we free. Let's get out of here. Where we gonna go?
Right.
Why are we gonna leave?"
Right.
Yeah,
that's a big good.
Yeah, I mean, what's better than this?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that's what has happened to us. But there are always a few who see things differently. Lonnie Smith was such a person. Lonnie Smith was a dentist here in Houston, Texas. at one time, we had primaries in Houston, Texas for voting in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Democratic Party. And those primaries were for whites only.
Yeah.
Lonnie Smith refused to accept that, took his case all the way to the Supreme Court to eliminate white primaries. And when he did, Texas then decided, okay, well, you said we can't have white primaries. We'll have white pre-primaries.
Wow.
So that's life for us has been normalized here to the extent that we accept things that are unusual to other people.
Yeah.
And that's what you mean by the culture and how you can get caught up in a culture that's antithetical to your best interest. And we do that. But there's a way out. And that is to understand the history and to understand the righteousness of being able to have the same opportunities that others have. We tend to, I'm really getting too far afield, but I've got to tell you.
No, talk. Hey, this is called real talk.
Okay, I got to tell you this. We tend to you and I, and I'm using us as examples, you and I don't do this, but we fight over a slice of a pie as opposed to doing what others are doing and fight for the whole pie.
Yeah.
So there's a slice that's given to us,
yeah,
especially as it relates to
contracts.
Yeah, there you go. And so we've got to fight over that slice, but there's a whole pie to be divided. And until we get to the point that we say, okay, the slice is nice, but the pie is the better thing to talk about. Let's talk about the pie.
Yeah.
And we fought over the slice for so long until we decided that, I want my affirmative action. Well, I want all of the action to be available. Affirmative is a step in that direction.
Right.
But we want the whole pie on the table. Why would we settle for something less than the whole pie?
Exactly.
So to get back to where we were, there are things that are happening that we don't know, but there are some of us who do. And those of us who do, who are in positions such as the one I'm in, then we've got a duty to bring it back and say, you get discriminated in lending. We got a duty to come back and say, when you try to buy a home, you're likely to be steered into a certain community because people don't want you in a given community. And these are things, redlining. These are the things that we have to do. And I'm proud to serve with Maxine Waters as the chair of financial services because she has accorded me and other chairpersons to have the liberty of bringing things before Congress that Congress never thought would be considered. Never thought they'd consider some of these things.
Yes.
And they're having to do like Slavery Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
But she's a real champion.
Let me ask you this. Going back to you introducing this House resolution and it getting passed, you had to do a lot of research.
Yes.
I know you're very, very knowledgeable about history and many things, but what were some eye-opening things in your research of, the first ship landing August 20th, 1619, near Norfolk, Virginia, and the time frame from 1619 to 1865 or beyond? What were some of the things that stood out to you? Because, sometimes researching history, real history, can be sometimes numbing. And it, in many cases, it's made me cry in many instances. What were some things that stood out to you?
Well, one of the things that caused tears to well in my eyes relates to the transportation of enslaved people to this country and how the bodies were thrown off the ship. Many of them were persons who just didn't survive, but if you were incorrigible, you could be extricated by throwing you off and then you're eliminated. But it was done to the extent that the sharks would follow the ships.
Yeah.
Because the sharks knew that there would be a feast. So they followed the slave ships and they would feast on people who could not survive the voyage. Some because of illness and others because they were incorrigible. There were some people who you just couldn't enslave them. I mean, they wouldn't take it, they fought it. So get rid of you.
Yeah.
When you do the research and you understand, it becomes more than words when you read about parents on the auction block, child sold to one plantation owner, mother to another, maybe to keep the father and mother together so they can reproduce, procreation for the benefit of the plantation. So they separate families like that. I mean, just imagine being torn away from your family so that you can go and work for somebody. It's a
For free.
horrific thing. Yeah, at no cost. It's horrific, just how horrible it was. And you mentioned the rape. Just at will. Just walk in and tell the spouse, in some cases, to go out to the field and just have your way with a man's wife. And there's nothing he can do about it.
Mm.
You know, it was that kind, it was demeaning. It was demoralizing. It was the dehumanization process. It was a crime against humanity.
Yes.
That's my final conclusion about slavery. A crime against humanity.
And, to think about so many people, particularly African Americans, Black folk, who would want us to not talk about this or to remember this or to because it could have very well been you if God would have allowed you to be born during that time.
But for the grace of God.
But for the grace of God, now we have this freedom that came, like you say, on the backs, the shoulders, because of those who fought. And I, Congressman Green, I'll be honest with you, I think God knew what he was doing by having me born during this time frame, because I know I would have been one of them incorrigible ones.
You've been thrown off the ship.
I would have been thrown off the ships, and the sharks would have had a good feast with me. But my thing is, not to talk about that in some sort of a prideful way, but to say, we really don't know how good we have it. And we really don't know what those individuals went through, who went through what they went through. And I encourage everybody, if you don't know your history, if you've not studied your history, and that's one of the things you mentioned in some of your commentary and press releases, you referenced the Holocaust. And the Holocaust didn't take place here on American shores, but yet here in America, we highlight, promote, even provide funding towards Holocaust. We have a Holocaust museums all across, right here in Houston, Texas, in DC, where you work. There's a remembrance of the Holocaust, and it had nothing to do with America, except for our involvement in the war. But
and by the way, we have those things, and we should, because of the horrific nature of the Holocaust.
Yes.
Holocaust was one of the greatest crimes against humanity ever perpetrated. Slavery was one of the greatest crimes against humanity ever perpetrated. They are similar, but not the same. And it's important for us to acknowledge what you just said, that we commemorate the Holocaust in this country, and we should, because of the horrific nature of it. So the question becomes, why don't we commemorate slavery to the same extent? Here's the answer. In commemoration of the Holocaust, you're looking through a window at another world, and you're commenting on what you see. You're giving actual, factual commentary. But when you look into slavery, you're looking into a mirror. And that causes you to have to do introspection. Now you got to examine yourself with the same lens that you utilize to examine the Holocaust. You got to now use that same lens on yourself.
Right. So I would more so call it judgment.
Yeah.
You're providing judgment against that foreign land and Hitler for what he did, and vilifying him and them because of what actions they took, because look at what they did.
Yes.
They were wrong.
It was, and it should be vilified.
Yes.
Make no mistake about it. But when you look in the mirror, when you look in the mirror, now you've got to look and say, well, was Robert E. Lee really a hero?
Yeah.
Or was it Nat Turner? Well, were the Daughters of the Confederacy really heroes, or was it Sojourner Truth? And was it Harriet Tubman?
Yeah.
By the way, this is an aside. It said that Harriet Tubman said she freed, hundreds of slaves, and would have freed hundreds more if they had known they were slaves.
Right.
See, that gets back to what you said earlier.
Yeah.
You know, you can be in your condition for so long that you don't know who you are
Yeah.
or what's happening
Yeah,
to
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So the point is, now we are doing that. That's what Slavery Remembrance Day will do.
Yeah.
It will cause us to identify the true heroes and heroines as opposed to the Confederate
Yeah.
heroes and heroines.
And I'm glad you segued back to what I wanted to come back to from when you actually mentioned that earlier, the Confederacy. And you talked about us highlighting the losers in this cause.
Traitors.
The traitors and losers.
Yeah,
traitors, losers, those who did not want to have anything to do with America any further.
And listen now, we got to single Texas out.
Right.
Look, I love my state. I'm wearing this tie, and I'm not going to let anybody say, you know, Al Green hates America. No, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I love America. That's why I'm willing to stay here and fight.
Yeah.
You know, to make it better.
Right.
But we can't. We have to single Texas out because Texas is the only state in the union to twice secede, mean leave.
Yeah.
Because of slavery.
Mm.
Texas was kicked out of Mexico or left Mexico because Mexico said, look, we're not going to tolerate that.
Yeah.
So Texas left.
Yeah.
And then Texas gets in the United States and Texas leaves the United States because of slavery.
Right.
Twice.
Right.
So again, the Confederacy, the whole notion of slavery has been turned upside down. It's on its head, and we have to write it.
Yeah.
We got to write this.
Yeah.
And the only way you can write it is to talk about it.
And see, that's why I want to bring that up, because you know we've had statues and streets and buildings and you know, parks and streets, roadways,
Dowling Street,
here in Houston, right
out there,
right. It used to, right up the street. You know, it's like, you know, now it's emancipation, but you know, you had statues and you know, even in the Capitol.
Sure.
You know, I know you've been an advocate against removing or changing the name of a particular building.
Ready to talk about it.
You know, we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But to your point, we have never in this country collectively really railed against, you know, the fact that we celebrate these traitors, these losers, these people who were separatists from this country.
Think of the number of Black children who grew up to be Black professionals, who went to a Lee High School.
Yeah.
That's Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
Now, how many Black professionals graduated from Turner High, Nat Turner High?
Mm.
How many graduated from Harriet Tubman Elementary?
Yeah.
We were denied access to our true history. And it's up to us to do what you're doing now, and let's tell the truth about it. And when we do this, we're going to take down Robert E. Lee's name. It ought not be there, shouldn't have been there. And we got to get their names, Fort Bragg, off of these military bases. These were Confederates, a good many of them, not all, Confederates. So this is a transition period that we're living in.
And to your point, you know, and you talked about the positions that we're in and that we hold. You know, before I got elected to the council in Missouri City, Texas, you know, I remember you coming before the city council. I was there that day. And I remember you coming before the city council, talking about some streets that we have in Missouri City and have had that were named after the Confederacy. And one of them, those streets still exist today, named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and a traitor as part of the Confederacy. But after hearing that, and of course, council did not take any action, but they did introduce a threshold change for name changes, which I believe came about because of another matter, but that's neither here nor there. But when they did that threshold change, it required at that time that the only way to make a change to a street name in Missouri City is you have to get 90% of the folks to agree on that street. Now, that's practically somewhat impossible, because if you got 10 houses, it means you actually literally have to get 9 out of the 10 people to agree, right? So it was not impossible, but mostly improbable that it would happen. So it never happened, and you had many of those people that were living on those streets that were offended, that, you know, even upon moving in, that they had to live on a street named after a racist or some Confederate
names. But anyway, fast forward, I got elected. And that was one of the things I remembered. And I know you and I had spoken about it, and it just, we didn't have the mindset, the paradigm as a collective council to do anything at that time. But I'm happy that you stayed the course and continued to make this an issue for us to keep top of mind, to the point where now we've had some traction in Missouri City, where 3 streets have been changed from a Confederate name to a new name: Prosperity Court, Prosperity Drive, and Prosperity Drive and Prosperity Circle, I think it's. So you look at all these particular situations, and there's more to change, but you were at the forefront of it. And actually, you provided funding out of your own personal pocket to encourage those individuals on those streets to change the names. But I know you want to do more. Why was that important?
The law was written such that there were 2 obstacles. First, the 90%. And then the second obstacle was, well, you got to pay for the change of the name yourself.
Yeah.
The city's not going to pay for the name change. But while I appreciate your generosity, the truth is, and I don't want this to become, to the peer person who are listening, to say, well, they got a mutual admiration society going on there. No, here's the truth. Your election to city council, dear brother, was a seminal moment in time, because you brought a different mindset to the city council. And without that mindset to permeate, to really sort of infect the others who are there, I could still be talking about what ought to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It takes people who get inside with an outside mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You got there, but you didn't leave your mentality outside.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, a good deal of the time, we get into these positions and the system then has an agenda for us. So we sacrifice the agenda that we thought we were running on for the agenda that the system has. But you never gave up your agenda.
Mm-mm.
You never gave up your agenda associated with freedom, liberty, and justice in the real sense of the words.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really made the difference. I'm convinced that I could still be talking to that council and they'd still be listening, but they don't have to do.
Mm-hmm.
It takes people like you to make that difference. And I'm appreciative for what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to get that threshold lowered from 90% to 70%, right, which gave the homeowners a lot more because what we did want is for people to agree.
Yeah.
We wanted at least a majority, a strong majority of those individuals to come together and agree. And because, like you say, they were to pay for this out of their own pocket, this change, that was another caveat and reluctancy for some people. And then there was other little things as well. But we were able to get 3 of them done, and we're pushing to get others done. And I know I won't rest, and I know you won't rest until we get that Nathan Bedford Forrest change. But we can't celebrate these traitors, these racist traitors who wanted us as a people to remain enslaved.
And we've got to have the courage to say racist traitors.
Yeah.
Because we have been so sensitized to this issue that we don't feel comfortable saying that they were racist traitors.
They were racist traitors.
Yeah, we don't feel comfortable saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've graduated just to the point that you can say that, then that means that you can now do something even more.
Right.
But a good many persons have been so indoctrinated in a very subtle way with sophisticated sophistry. We've been so indoctrinated that we don't feel comfortable speaking the truth.
Mm.
Because they've caused us to believe that you're going to insult people when you say that. You're
mm-hmm.
insulting them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I say that having a racist a building named after a racist in Washington, D.C., I think that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
For my tax dollars to be used to repair, to maintain a facility named after a racist.
Mm-hmm.
So I say it, but I make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I make people uncomfortable in the Democratic Party when I do it.
Right.
Because there are a good many people who who are status quo oriented.
And let's keep in mind, and I know you're a staunch Democrat.
Oh, I am.
You know,
But I'm a liberated Democrat.
But yes, but you do know that, you know, as you know historically,
Yes.
that many of the Democrats or many of the people that pushed these policies were,
Of course.
it was a part of the Democratic Party and
Yes.
its agenda. So, you know, the people that you probably make uncomfortable,
Right.
the Strong Thurmans of the world,
Right. Richard
you know,
Russell is
and
the name.
right? Of the, no,
Yeah.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
but the building
Yeah.
you're talking about. But
Yeah.
I'm saying, but the Strong Thurmans
Yeah.
and people of the world
Yeah.
who were Democrats
That's right.
at one point in time, up
That's
until their death, you know, you make people uncomfortable because, like you said, you're looking in the mirror.
Mirror.
You know, you're looking in the mirror now, and that's what's making you uncomfortable, looking at yourself,
That's right.
having to look at yourself and be held accountable for what you did. Let's talk about the breakfast that took place this past Saturday, Congressman. You again, you know, and I know you do things intentionally and with intentionality. You did a breakfast, and you said over 1,000 folks came. It was held at the Power Center, and we want to thank you for advertising and promoting and marketing that effort. This free breakfast that you paid for.
Well, can I back? I don't mean to interrupt, but I got to tell you this. It was over 1,000 because I paid for 980 something, I think. So
Yeah.
And then there were a lot of folk who didn't eat any breakfast. Not everybody who comes to a breakfast eats.
Right.
So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, and this is really important, I paid for it with tax dollars.
Yeah.
I paid for it with tax dollars because I want people to know that reparation starts with every one of us who hold public trust whenever we can.
Yeah.
See, I hold public trust. I'm a member of Congress. I have a budget. And with my budget, I can host friends who are my constituents for a breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I decided to host 1,000 as opposed to 10 or 15.
Right.
So I paid for that with tax dollars.
Yes.
And at some point, somebody's going to say, well, how can you do that? Because it's a part of my budget.
Yeah.
That's how I can do that. And it's
what I wanted to do.
It's a legislative update.
Right.
So I updated people on this legislation, which was labor remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm proud to say that was my small contributions to reparations.
Yeah.
You know, I believe in reparations.
Yeah, I do.
I do. So what I'm going to do is whenever I can contribute to the cause of reparations by showing people that the government can do this,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do it myself by way of example.
Right.
And that's just important to say. I didn't mean to stop you because
no.
You own a good role.
Yeah. But I'm saying is I saw the matter of fact, Congressman, is our lead story this week in the Forward Times. And it'll also be in Black Press USA as well. But I say all that to say that I saw the pictures. I was unfortunately unable to attend. I was out of town, but I did inform you that I wouldn't be able to be there. But we promoted it, marketed it, and pushed it out. And we thank Forward Times thanks you for that. And of course, the community thanks you for what you did. But talk about what happened there. What was the layout?
Well, the first thing that I have to tell you is that the personal pronoun I is inappropriate. It was a we event. It was not an I. My mother taught me to say we because she understood and made me understand that you do very little by yourself. So I only say I now for communication purposes. I was able to have working with me Bishop James Dixon,
mm-hmm.
who is the president of the NAACP, among many other things, at the Community of Faith Church. And Bishop Dixon and I worked very closely together to get other ministers involved. Pastor Max Miller, mm-hmm. who heads the Baptist ministers and vicinity, and Pastor Rugley Monroe, who has an alliance, Pastor Gilbert, all of these heads of these various associations related to religion. Pastor Dixon got them involved and encouraged them to come. We wanted to make sure that in doing this, that we had a certain degree of solemnity associated with it, but also a certain amount of celebration, because we commemorate what happened to them, but we celebrate how they came through it. And I'm proud to say that under the stewardship of Bishop Dixon, we were able to get probably over 100 ministers in attendance at the breakfast. and there was singing. V. Michael McKay.
Mhm.
That's V as in Victor,
Mhm.
not as I used to think it was the Michael McKay.
Well, he is the Michael
The
McKay.
Michael McKay.
He is the V Michael McKay.
Yeah, but so we had good singing, and it was a moment in my life that I'll cherish forever. But it wasn't a moment that I created. It was a moment that I helped to facilitate. The creation involved many persons. We had Suzette Caldwell, Pastor Suzette from over at Windsor Village. She spoke and did an outstanding job. We had the county district clerk out in Fort Bend County, Beverly, to speak. It used to be Clark. Her last name escapes me now, but we had her to speak, and so it was balanced,
Mhm.
and it's something that we're going to do again and again and again. We hope to make it an annual event, but we also need to do something else, and this was a part of it. And I guess this is really the centerpiece of the event, aside from what we said about slavery. But there has to be an anti-racism agenda. We do not have an anti-racism agenda associated with legislation.
Mhm.
So we want this to become the
Unless
place.
you're Asian.
We want this to become the place. Well, I'm not going to say that. We
Well,
want,
they just passed when the uptick in Asian
Violence,
crimes with violence was taking place.
well,
There was some legislation that was passed, which was an anti racism
Right.
against Asian
yeah, but
legislation.
well, that was what we called it. Okay. But the truth is, it applied to anybody who was treated that way.
Mhm.
But that was the catalyst for it, and it should have been the catalyst for it
Mhm.
because of what happened. I went to Georgia after those persons were killed at those spas, and I met with the family members. I know the pain and the suffering, and I think it was very much appropriate to say we're going to do something, and we want to let the world know that the catalyst for this is while this is the catalyst, it still applies to anybody who's hurt in a certain way. But we need an anti-racism agenda for legislation so that people who have the courage to introduce legislation to deal with racism, there would be a place for them to showcase it and for other people to know about it. Because now if you do introduce legislation to deal with racism, it's likely to be put on a back burner someplace and find its way into oblivion. So we want to make sure that we give that opportunity. And I'm going to give you an example of two pieces of legislation, if I may,
Yeah.
that we showcased at this event. The first is the Richard Russell Office Building. The Richard Russell Office Building ought not exist. It ought to be some other office building. And I have no name that I'm going to throw out because then it becomes, well, he just wants a certain name. No, I said it ought to revert back to the name that it had before they put the name of the racist bigot Richard Russell on it. And that name was the Old Senate Office Building. That's what it ought to be until we can come up with another name. Now, I'll let people decide what that name is. But here's the sad thing. Democrats control the House and the Senate. So we at some point you have to look in the mirror.
Mm.
You got to look in the mirror. Michael Jackson, where did he start?
Man in the mirror.
Yeah. You got to look in the mirror. So it was Democrats. And look, I'm a Democrat, but I tell people I'm a liberated Democrat in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, of course, as well. But in the spirit of being unbought, unbossed, unafraid. Okay, that's my approach to this job. And if you can't be unbossed, unbought, and unafraid, then you're probably not going to do your best work.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, we have that piece of legislation, and we showcased it. And then there's another one. We have not come to terms with each other in this country, and we need a Department of Reconciliation. If you look up the word reconcile, you will see that there is one meaning that says people who's trying to settle their differences, and they may have had some sort of positive relationship. But there's also the definition of people who never have settled their differences, they still need to reconcile. Well, that's where we are. And we need just as we have a Department of Labor, Labor fought for that because Labor wanted to make sure labor issues got to the president. The best way to do that is have a department with a Secretary of Labor who reports directly to the president. Well, the people in business community, they decided, look, we need to make sure our business gets to the president. So they have a Department of Commerce with a Secretary of Commerce, goes straight to the president. Well, issues related to racism ought to get straight to the president. You need a department that deals with that. That's a Department of Reconciliation. And that person would then have undersecretaries of reconciliation. Have a budget. I have proposed that it be 10% of the budget that we have for the Defense Department for a multiplicity of reasons. One being the Defense Department is huge and 10% would be enough. But the other is we're always going to fund the Defense Department. So we're always going to have the Department of Reconciliation funded. We won't have a Congress that can come along and kill it by simply denying it funding, which is the lifeblood of these institutions. So we have this Department of Reconciliation, and we have a person whose job it is to eliminate invidious discrimination. Invidious means harmful. Eliminate invidious discrimination. Discrimination can be harmful and it can be helpful, but we want to deal with the harmful. So those are two pieces of legislation. Now, there's other legislation that was filed in Congress, and most of us don't know about it, that deals with invidious discrimination. Well, that's the anti-racism legislation that we need to have, and we need to talk about that at an annual event. And that will then encourage other persons who hold public trust to go out and sponsor this kind of legislation, because now there's a forum for talking about it without fear of reprisal. And that's what we'll do.
So, you know, I'm thinking about a couple of pieces of legislation. One already on the books, and I'd never understood why they had to tag someone else onto it, but James Byrd and Matthew Shepard, hates crime bill is different than what you're talking about.
Different in the sense that the names were attached to the legislation. Byrd was lynched with a chain, pulled behind a vehicle, just a horrific way to treat a person. So that name was affixed to it because it was a means by which it could gain some attention, and it enhanced the penalty such that persons could get greater punishment for a horrific crime, intentionally murdering a person or hurting a person because of their race. Same thing happened with Matthew Shepard, which was horrible. You know, put to a fence. It's almost like they crucified this young man. And we do that, and that was good. And I would put that in the class. It took a moment to get those pieces of legislation through Congress, by the way. And we have some other legislation that's pending before Congress right now related to criminality and how we treat the constabulary when it misbehaves.
So how? And I know we're up against it because we can talk for hours. How can the Congress of the United States immediately after these instances that took place in Georgia with the Asian community, not only immediately push for, but pass and get signed into law by the president, something that, you know, is tied to the Asian community, with them being, you know, I guess at the forefront of that piece, although it applies to everyone, but not pass something that the African American community is saying that they want and need, such as the George Floyd bill or the voting rights legislation, particularly in the sense that, you know, you mentioned it earlier, just a second ago, we do have a Democratic House and Senate and a Democratic president. And just like with your name change of the Russell building, you know, nothing's happening.
Well, fair question, in this sense that we want to know why we can't get some of the things that are important to other people, us done in this case. Those were horrific events. What happened to us, George Floyd, was a horrific event because he was literally executed before an audience. That was an execution, and the person has been punished properly. Well, some would say improperly, but I'm proud that he was convicted and has received what I consider a harsh sentence. And it has to do, a lot of this, with how pervasive some of the legislation is. This George Floyd legislation is good legislation, but it takes on a portion of the constabulary, the police department, in that It bans chokeholds, no knock laws. No, Brianna.
Yeah.
What happened? Just shooting up the place and
Mhm.
kill the innocent person. Say her name. This is pretty tough on the status quo, and that can have a little bit to do with it. But I would say I'm never going to diminish what happened to those Asian women. Uh, Went to work, doing their jobs, and never went home because somebody decided to go in and kill them. So it really, if you want, you could also juxtapose it to what we're trying to do for those 19 babies who were killed at Robb Elementary.
Mhm.
We can't get the governor to even call a special session of the legislation. 19 babies murdered. So it's, in a sense, it's not just us. Okay, it depends on who the legislation impacts. And there are people in this state who are of the opinion that the law of what we used to call the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, that's what ought to apply. So rather than get those long guns off the street that have high capacity magazines,
Mhm.
they want to give everybody a long gun with a high capacity magazine, and everybody then
Fight fire with
yeah,
fire.
and then give the teachers one,
Yeah.
and let them deal with it. Even
Everybody
though
get
you had hundreds of people who were armed and had on the military regalia, they had the vests and the helmets and long guns, but they didn't go in that room.
Right.
So you
Right.
want a teacher to do what you
Right.
couldn't get all of those
Officers,
armed officers to do,
Yeah.
who have better training than the teacher would have.
Yeah.
So I'm saying to you,
And who took an oath.
the nature of the legislation, and I wouldn't just juxtapose it to the circumstances as they relate to African Americans. I would juxtapose it to the people that are going to be impacted. And I have to say this on that, we're far afield, but I've got to say it. 19 babies murdered, 2 teachers, and the governor comes out, has a press conference to glorify the officers who were caught on camera standing around waiting on something to happen.
Mhm.
With one baby calling to saying, here we are, my friend is dead. Baby took the blood of a friend and put it on her body. She's got to remember that the rest of her life.
Yes.
So I'm saying to you that some of these things are just horrific, but that governor was wrong to come out and glorify those officers.
Yes,
He was wrong.
Yes,
Either he knowingly or unknowingly participated in a cover-up.
Yeah.
Because that was a cover-up. He wittingly or unwittingly participated in a cover-up.
Congressman Green, I thank you so much for being on Real Talk Junkies today. We could go for hours. I definitely plan to have you back to talk about, I know you're fighting for continued legislation. And we always need reports to find out what's going on in DC, and we appreciate you for being on with us today. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about Original Slavery Remembrance Day and what they can do to help encourage and promote this, what website or where will you have them go?
Well, I would have them go to my office website. That's Al Green at mail.house.gov. And we should have information there for you. Or you can call our office at 713-383-9234.
Okay.
713-383-9234.
All right.
And I'm grateful to you for allowing me the opportunity to be on your great program.
All right. Thank you so much. Hey, that'll do it, y'all. We're about to get up out of here. That is another hot edition of Real Talk Junkies. Make sure you share the link. I encourage all of you, man, to share the link, and make sure you tune in next week for another hot edition of Real Talk Junkies Live, y'all. Let's go.